I'm Javier Espinoza, Europe Executive Editor of the Capital Forum, and today I'm at the European Parliament in Brussels, a buzzing place of activity after the summer break. With me, Eva Maydell. She is an MEP now on your third term. At some point, you were selected, you were the youngest MEP in the Parliament, so you have grown your career and developed a lot of the political sense on how Brussels works. You have been selected by Politico among the women who shape Brussels. The FT has named you as the top 100 most influential people in Central and Eastern Europe, and you were one of the most influential ones on Forbes magazine as well. So this is just to say that this is why we're talking to you today, because you understand how Brussels works. I'm curious, because in this podcast, more than just going at the headlines and quick quotes, I just want to know, talk me through how does it work from being the youngest MEP to where you are in your career now?
And seasoned now.
No. And you're not yet at the level of legend. There are many decades to go.
I was just recently reflecting, and there was a recent article that I read by a friend of mine, which was, what if some of those leaders like Xi or Putin live forever? But it made me also think about a lot of those European and not only leaders that rise too fast and too quick, and they became prime ministers in their late 20s or early 30s. This is to show how dynamic politics had become, and how often, if you reach the top of a political career when you're 30, what is next? So in a way, I think my case is very different, thankfully, but throughout the years spent in Brussels, I think I have learned how the machinery works, and I also have seen how we can change things in order to make the institutions deliver better, be more adequate to the changes of time that we live in. So definitely the experience I can see today how it's different from when I started. Mm-hmm. And when I started, to a certain extent, I thought I'm operating like a startup in the Parliament, working on topics that no one worked on, related to tech, transatlantic relationship as well. It's not that, global politics was not part of what the Parliament was talking about, but I was interested in our relationship on competitiveness, on technology, and for everyone else, the EU-US relationship were more about global politics. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a different dimension, as we understand nowadays, that is very important, and it cannot be undermined. So I started operating in a way, in a silo a little bit, because those topics were seen as not dominant. But then I quickly understood that if I would like to see certain progress on those, we need to build coalitions. We need to find individuals that would be interested to advance those topics. And a funny thing, speaking of startups, I think with my team we were the first ones to introduce the word startup to European legislation in a positive way, where we can empower and support startups. And I remember I had a discussion in the EPP group while working on an internal paper with one of the most prominent figures at the time, probably an MEP who's been close to 30 years in the Parliament, Elmar Brok. And he said, why are we going to talk about startups? There's SMEs and, we move on. Why do we talk about skilled professionals? Education is a national prerogative. And we had a big clash in the group meeting, but it helped us to release some some tension and figure out a way forward. And afterwards, we collaborated very well with someone that was mainly known as the Merkel man in Brussels, and also someone that mainly dealt with, geopolitics and foreign affairs. And we pushed the word through, but also the mindset of, there are other companies that are emerging in Europe in the technological arena, and not only that is worth paying attention to.
And now that we're talking about
because now it's sexy, everyone pays attention to that, right?
Exactly, it's a very sexy topic. But now that we're talking about tech, and you mentioned startups, and you've seen the change through your career, what is the state of tech sovereignty in Europe? How do you see it? It's a buzzword as well that this commission, and I guess the previous one, was already discussing a lot.
Yeah, it is. And it's been now a buzzword for a few years. And I think we need to go beyond those words and see what is our understanding and our plans, and to what extent it is possible. Because it's one thing to speak about it, and it's very different when you actually read official Commission proposals who acknowledge that it will be very difficult to become, if not actually impossible, to become 100% sovereign. It's probably not necessary even at all, but we don't really go beyond the buzzword very often in discussions. So what I've noticed is that there is more talk in town, more than ever before, actually. The amount of panels and conferences that are convening have never been that many compared to 5 or 7 years ago. But we often leave them at the level of the buzzwords, particularly from a political point of view. And I think now we again need to look for coalitions and way to go forward and put more emphasis on our strengths, build those, make them even more robust, more resilient, and we definitely have a number of strengths. So I think our focus has to lie there, to put it in very broad terms again. I mean, I don't think the interview, the next 20 minutes, we're going to spend just talking about that, but I'm happy to elaborate.
And we can elaborate, but tell me, because you understand this institution, and the Parliament often gets accused of maybe just a political posturing, not really having a say, or like dragging its feet, or not being as powerful as the Commission. What is the role of lawmakers in this?
I don't know. Are we? I mean, we're a co-legislator, right? So as a co-legislature, we have an equal say. And if we take one of the important priorities for the institutions, such as simplification, I think the Parliament is ready to be more ambitious this term than the Commission is, for example. And this is definitely what is also demanded by both businesses and citizens. So I think it depends. It really depends the matter. And then the Parliament, of course, has different political groups that desire different outcomes. But we do represent the citizens, and I think is important, after all, that we as co-legislator have our weight. I think the weight that one has in negotiations is not determined by in which institution you sit. I think it's determined by the vision you have, is determined by how profoundly you have, assessed, if it's in tech, our capabilities, where can we lead, where we need to cooperate, where we are dependent, and then have a plan based on that. We cannot have a plan to try and copy and mimic others, because this is what others are doing. So if others are pouring investments, according to many, we exactly need to do the same. That's the easy conversation. I think the more difficult conversation to have is how to craft that unique European vision, in particularly on where is our position in the technological arena.
You talk about the different political groups, and being in politics, as you know, it requires a lot of negotiation and going back and forth. What's your approach when you're dealing with your colleagues and you want to advance a file on AI, which we'll get to, or any other sort of files that you deal with?
Yeah. I understand that the times have become even more divisive, but I do not think that we can make sensible policies if we continue on the division part. I think we need to continue finding dialogue, common points of agreement and advancing them. So I have always tried to find a way to cooperate with colleagues from different groups. And I think this is essential. And I also think it's not just important to talk to those colleagues when the file's on the table. I think it's important to maintain this relationship throughout the years. And just be able to talk to one another, to listen to one another. I think this is the biggest inability that we have nowadays, to try and listen. We might not agree, but at least we need to listen to each other's point of view and try to understand it, and maybe still disagree. But we have to be able to sit around the same table and converse. Losing this ability will make it impossible for us to advance sensible policies.
Especially in a very, as you say, divisive environment. But going back to the tech sovereignty, you mentioned simplification, and I think it's important that we touch on it because it's the flavor of this new commission. And in the context of competitiveness and Mario Draghi's push for the EU to be at least at the same level of the US or China or other blocs in the world, tell me how is that going so far? How do you see it evolving?
Well, I think, the Commission has taken that matter seriously, which is good. And I think it makes a lot of sense that there's a focus on that. But simplification alone will help us to a certain extent. If we want to help European companies, we also need to make sure that electricity prices are not as high as they are in some member states. We also need to make sure that the access to a capital that is probably available, one would argue, in Europe, is available across Europe. And so those companies can actually scale. We need to make sure that bottlenecks, whenever they're detected for a company to scale, we find solutions on how to tackle those. So simplification alone will help, but if we would have something like the 28th regime or EU Inc., however you want to put it, it would make a lot of sense, because then you can compare even more so the European market to the US market. Then you can compare their capital markets to our capital markets. We miss these two components at the moment, and we need to make sure that they're there. So just doing one thing, one really, it will be helpful, but it won't necessarily solve, the entire puzzle.
Can we flesh out for our listeners that might not know about this idea of the 28th regime and how you see it working in practice?
Well, I think the idea is, instead of registering a company in 27 countries or 25 or 3 different countries, depending where you want to have your operations, dealing with different tax systems, et cetera, being able to set it up in one country, but having operations in other, to put it in simple terms. I haven't seen the blueprint yet, of course, but I hope it's going to be as ambitious as possible, and I very much hope that the Parliament will push that ambition even forward.
Very good, and you really outlined the internal initiative of the EU very well. How do we deal with the external pressures? In particular, Donald Trump has been quite vocal against the EU in light of all the recent fines against Google, Apple, and others. On tech in particular, he has mixed trade and tech and make it very, very political, and we cannot ignore that pressure.
This is not something that it was not expected. I think it was very wise for the Commission to keep trade and tech separate for the time being. I think these are two very different conversations. And so they need to be tackled differently, because I think where we still need to do a little bit more work is, explain what our tech rules actually are, have our own narrative. Currently, tech rules equals fines, and I don't think so. I don't think we have those rules because of the fines. Of course, that's what makes headlines, that's what's juicy, but I don't think these rules are there because of the fines. The way the EU has been working on these rules is to make sure we have some sort of a social contract with our citizens. These are rules that are not against any particular company or any particular country. They're rules to protect our citizens and our markets. So whoever operates will have to abide by those rules. Now, I understand that this is not necessarily what our partners would like to hear, but I think we missed an opportunity in the past years when we were enjoying a so-called maybe honeymoon relationship, transatlantic relationship, to better explain our narrative, because this narrative has been forming for a long time, and no one has really been able to provide the other type of narrative. If I have to be quite critical here, I would need to say this is partially due to the fact that a lot of tech legislation has been put on the table, not necessarily knowing how the digital jigsaw looks like in its entirety, and not knowing, what is our vision and our actual goal. It's been more of a piecemeal approach, and then put them all together has become difficult to explain what it is beyond protecting our market or our citizens. And I think there's more reason behind it. But this leads me to what we have to do now. So as of now, be it simplification or investments, we need to have a lot of clarity in our, goals and aims, in our focus, most importantly, what we want to achieve. Having AI for the sake of having AI, or investing in AI for the sake of AI, these are the questions that already I'm certain, because I do keep in touch and talk on a regular basis. Even Silicon Valley investors are saying, is this actually wise and smart, what we are doing right now? Mm-hmm. We need a European edge in AI, and that edge could look like developing niche AI models that serve business needs, not necessarily one that wants to win the global race, because we can talk about the race, which is a race with no rules. And also, when there's a race, you kind of need to have a finish line. Has anyone explained what that finish line looks? Mm-hmm. Because with each investment comes another investment, and a third and a fourth, and another collaboration between companies. So it seems like no one knows what the finish line is. Mm-hmm. I think for Europe, that would also mean building reliable infrastructure, whether it's computing or connectivity or human-centric rules for AI. And also, it will be important to have the conversation, which no one in this town yet has, is, are we using it as an instrument, or are we going to use it as an agent? Do we in Europe want to serve people, or we want to replace them? Of course, I'm going a little bit too far here, but I think it's a conversation that has to happen in order for us to determine our own vision. Why the investments? Why the factories? Who are they going to benefit, and what is the purpose? And make sure that this is not just a bubble discussion or a discussion of which country is going to get a factory. That has to be a more societal discussion, which involves the smaller businesses, those that can actually make sure that the smaller AI models can benefit them. Because I think, and I finish on this point, as I said, if you are in a race with no rules, and a race that has no clear end goal, but just to be first, I think we don't need to win it by being first, but we can win it by being right, by having technologies that are accessible, implementable, transparent, that are aligned also with our values. So I think we really need to define what it is that we are after.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about this race, and it might be a race to the bottom and no rules. But in fact, Brussels has been pushing this AI Act, this AI rules. Is that the right way to go about it?
Well, I think there's two things here. I think if you put rules and if you understand this is a transformative technology, you also want to have a stake in it in whatever way, as I explained. I mean, I might have my own ideas, the Commission might have others, the member states, but we need to sit around the table and find an agreement. What is our vision? So it's one thing to have rules to which we all agreed, but another thing is to build the companies. And I don't think we necessarily need, a European version of, ChatGPT necessarily. Is it really needed? Is it, I think one could discuss, is it even possible? Do customers and consumers actually need that? So I think this is not the conversation necessarily, but it's about, again, the business needs, how AI can be applied in our businesses. Because if we look at data nowadays, what data shows is basically that in Europe, 1 in 10 companies has skilled employees that are needed to apply AI successfully. SMEs only at around below even 20% are adopting AI at the moment. But the most striking data for me is that out of all companies that were trying to integrate AI, 95% of them end up with zero return on investment at the moment. So we need to look into those numbers very, very carefully and see how can we make the right partnerships? How can we make sure that companies need the right to have the right tools, ask the right questions in order to apply AI. Because after all, I think our stronghold are our traditional industries, be it in pharmaceuticals, in chemicals, healthcare, agriculture, and so on. But if they're able to apply AI within their operations, the likelihood this could propel further our economy, and to use another buzzword, our competitiveness, would be way higher than just having AI for the sake of AI.
Very good. I'm mindful of the time, so just to finish on this point of competitiveness and opening markets and making a Europe environment that thrives, if you were appointed or if there was a dream person or actions from a competitiveness digital commissioner, what does this person need to do?
Well, this is a very tough question because it's not just up to one person. But there's like 3 things that I think are important that a person in leadership position in Europe should be thinking. So first of all, today leaders have to understand profoundly the technological advancements and have to have their own mind and their own thinking of what technology means for our society and how it transforms it, for our businesses, even for politics. I often hear, the typical sentences that I've heard 10 years ago. I mean, but technology is uncomparable to 10 years ago. So our narrative and our thinking has to advance. So that's for any person. And the advice that I give, if I may, often when I speak to some of those people in position, and they don't necessarily need to tackle tech, is that, meet with some of those thinkers from all different sides, be it on those that are more cautious or those that are the investors and builders of the infrastructure and of the technology, and make up your own mind. So this would be the first thing. The second thing is, I think we need to understand that our institutions are not necessarily fit for the 2025. And what I mean by this is that we need to become more agile, more flexible. We cannot use the same tools we used to use. We need to think differently. So if we always worked with strategies and plans and communications, maybe now we need a different approach. So sometimes we see a document that is clearly a patchwork of various DGs. So everybody puts their ideas. But the question is, what is actually, the strength there, and can we amplify that strength? You barely can understand what is the actual aim we're trying to do. So we need a different approach of how we collaborate within the institutions and how we make those plans, and then, of course, how we execute them. So for me, this would be the two most important things. And also what I really think Europe needs is a little team or a unit that tackles economic security and attracts investment. So you need few individuals that are given the mandate by the Commission, backed, of course, by the member states, who, go beyond what the CHIPS Act says, for example, because it might say, we'll make it easier for you to do business in Europe and to open a fab, but who is actually making sure that those fabs come to Europe. So if we're to buy a certain amount of AI chips, as it's been agreed between the two administrations in Brussels and in DC, shouldn't we go further and think maybe, as IMAC or other, important European players in the chip supply chain and value chain can be part of the design or working. So there's ways of how to develop those ideas, because I just don't think it's just you having something on paper, it's enough. You need a team that can think with a different mindset. You can call it chief investment officer or however, but people that don't just have the title, but they actually put the operations behind. So yeah, think a little bit out of the usual way institutions have been operating until now.
Excellent. Huge aspirations for even bigger problems. Thank you so much for your time, Eva Maydell, and hope to see you again.
Yep,
Thank you.
Thanks to you.